Well, hello. Here we are with our very first podcast, How to Recover from Trauma. What a brilliant title that is.
Yeah.
That's straight to the point of how can we help people recover. So I have the lovely Claire here,
Hello.
and we are not entirely sure what we're doing with the podcast, but we're excited to learn on the way. So feedback would be helpful. But we're going to talk about how to recover from trauma. Am I meant to introduce myself at this point?
Yes. Yeah, you are.
For those that don't know, I am Betsy de Thierry. I'm actually a qualified primary school teacher. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm a mother of four sons, 28, 26, 22 and 16.
Good memory.
It's because the 22-year-old's sitting there. I didn't want to mess that one up. And yeah, and I do lots of things. I've started lots of charities and things. So, and I've written some books. They're here, so you can see them. That's who I
It's
am.
a really good number of books. Which one is your favourite?
Oh, I haven't introduced you.
Oh, okay. We'll start there.
You are Claire,
Hello, I'm Claire.
and you have worked with me now for how many years?
Nearly 12.
That's a long time.
Yeah. It was only meant to be one.
Was
So, yeah, I think I came on to intern with you for 1 year, and then now it's 12. So
Wow. And how has that been?
It's been very, very interesting, very eye-opening. I've loved it because I really love the message. And having done like 5 years of studying psychology before, it was really cool coming and working for a grassroots charity which did stuff very, very differently. So I've really appreciated that, which I think we're going to jump into on this podcast
Amazing.
of what differences. But yeah, no, I've really learnt so much. So
Well, you're
it's a
amazing
pleasure to be
work
here.
with. And I love working with you. You're amazing. You're very helpful. So yes, written lots of books. What was my favourite? You asked.
Yeah.
Which there's two.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not sure about this one being my favourite yet because it's new. But I think there's three.
That's okay. You're allowed more than
I
one.
think my favourite probably is the shame one. I think so.
Yeah.
Because I think shame is this invisible poison that causes people to be stuck with what I would call trauma symptoms, what other people might call mental health problems, and they just don't know what it is, and that's painful. Whereas this very simple little book is trying to explain what it is, where it came from, and how you can actually you can come out from under it, so you no longer end up feeling like you're bad, but instead you can recognize that you're a great human. Whoever you are, you're a great human, but you've had stuff happen to you. Guilt, you see. Oh, I'm not meant to be talking about this, but I can't help it. Well, you see, guilt is helpful.
Yeah.
I'm a mum of four. I want my kids to feel bad if they've done something wrong because that's important. Guilt enables us to reconcile and say sorry and repair relationships. Guilt's helpful, but shame is not I did something bad. Shame is I'm bad. And so many people today are walking around feeling like they're bad. There's something wrong with them. They don't fit. They don't belong there. And I hate that. And I want to help. So that book is trying to help people understand why they feel they're bad so that they can actually stop feeling that they're bad and recognize their own humanity and begin to actually appreciate their uniqueness and their all of that stuff. So that's that. But that's
because
probably
when you feel
my
bad,
favourite.
it impacts in so many ways, doesn't it? Of how you interact with everything and everyone.
Yeah.
So actually, I know I found that actually really helpful because you don't realise until you're reading about it. It was like a little light went on of, that makes so much sense. That's why I react like that in that situation.
Yeah.
And I think they're fantastic resources. And so many people say that, don't they, when they read them of like, I actually understand myself now.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a brilliant book.
Shame does have that thing where once the light comes on once, you can detect it. So you just do your life and then you feel funny or you just want to hide or you want to run away or you feel defensive or you something like that and you just think, and then you can go, I wonder if that was a feeling of shame.
Yeah.
You're less powerless to feelings where you can just end up feeling absolutely rubbish and want to hide a lot of your life. And I think so many people feel like that.
Yeah.
That's why I love that one. Anyway, there's 2 others that are my favourite, but I feel like we might be here for a long time if we could do that. So I'm not sure if we want to stay there.
Well, you could do a whole podcast episode on each book, couldn't you? Really?
Oh, that's a really good idea.
Note that down. Let's write that down.
That's a great plan. Let's do that. Yeah, because there's a lot to say about them.
Yeah. Would it help for anyone who's new and listening just to tell people what your definition of trauma is? Oh. I wonder if that's a good starting place just to...
Yeah.
Like, because you've already mentioned quite a few of the words already.
That is true. Yeah, what a good idea. And actually, I'm fairly sure, although not 100% sure, that in every single one of my books it starts at that point.
Yeah, right.
So, because I think it's such an important thing to start with. What is trauma? So, I define that as 3 words. The experience of terror, powerlessness, and overwhelm. And that's because anything that terrifies you, and terror is way worse than a little bit of fear. Like, just now we were finding a coffee and I might have had a little bit of fear that there wasn't enough. That's completely different to terror, which is gripping your body. It grips your emotions. It's a physical experience. And I think terror needs to be understood as different from a little bit of nervousness or a little bit of anxiety. Anxiety is on a continuum too, but anyway. So there's terror. Yeah. But then if you feel utterly powerless in a terrifying situation, that impacts you significantly. And so what we recognise is that adults might experience something terrifying, but they're more empowered to do something about it. They're bigger, they're stronger, they can run faster, arguably. And so
some can.
Exactly. And so that feeling of terror, they're less terrified because they can do something. Whereas children are absolutely powerless because they're dependent on the adults, and the younger they are, the more dependent they are on adults, and so the more the terror can actually grip them because they can't do anything about it. They're stuck. And then the 3rd word is overwhelm. So if you're terrified and then you're powerless, if at that point you have somebody somewhere that you can run to, scream at, you can process on, actually you kind of go back down to just not feeling quite so powerless, and then you don't feel quite so terrified. But if actually you're terrified and powerless and you can't talk to anyone, you're told it's a secret, or you feel like it's a secret, or what's happened to you might bring you more shame, then actually what often happens is people end up being silent, pushing it down, pretending it didn't happen, and that sense of overwhelm of, oh my goodness, I'm holding this thing where I'm terrified, I'm powerless, and now I feel overwhelmed, except you can't put it into those succinct words when it's an experience. So I think those 3 words are in order. Terror, powerless, and overwhelm. And those 3 words, I think, describe very clearly the elements of trauma.
Yeah. And then on your handbook, I love that the next word is recovery.
Yeah.
Can you say a bit about why recovery?
Because I actually believe recovery is possible. And as you know, because you were around, when we started the Trauma Recovery Centre, which is a therapy centre with now multiple sites, when we started it, and it was called the Trauma Recovery Centre, I thought that was entirely normal. I didn't know it was abnormal. I've always thought, obviously you recover from trauma. Isn't that the point? I think a little bit like if you go to the doctor because you're sick, why do you go to the doctor? Surely you go because you want to recover from the sickness. You wouldn't go otherwise. You don't want to go and for them to say, well, you've got this incurable disease. That's the percentage of people that are traumatized by visiting the doctor.
Yes.
But most of us hope to go to the doctor. Our hope is that we'll get some instructions for how to recover. So that's how I've always viewed kind of the mental health system, actually, which apparently is not a common view.
No.
I've learned.
Well, no, because I remember being really shocked when I came off my master's and started working for you. I'd done five years at uni and doing a master's in psychology, and never really was recovery talked about. I mean, I actually think I only had trauma on about 3 slides in those times. This is going back 14 years, but it was very much all around PTSD for veterans. Mm-hmm. And then it wasn't really talked about of recovery, and everything that we looked at with the lens was, yes, it was, we want to help people, but it was never this concept that you could actually recover from what you've gone through. And it was, so for me, it was wild when I joined, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a really great idea.
Yeah. I mean, in fairness, I don't think it was on any of my courses ever either.
Yeah.
I can't think, I mean, they were a long time ago.
Yeah,
I'm a little older than you.
You were a primary teacher, but after that.
Yeah, well, then I trained I trained at the same time. I did my first certificate in counselling with Relate when I was 16 years old. So that was a long time ago, because I'm 53. So I then went on to do psychotherapy. I did counselling. I've done quite a few different training courses. But none of them have been about recovery. But I think it's just been a thread that's run through my life, that I really believe recovery is possible. And that's all I've ever worked with, really. Even as a primary school teacher, which I only was for 2 years, I was all about creating a classroom that was entirely emotionally safe for children and young people to use creative activities to help them explore sometimes things that have happened to them. So they weren't in the subconscious yet because they're little. So they were still very much, they were talking about whether it was moving house or mum and dad fighting. Like I had spaces within the classroom. I had therapeutic storybooks. I had a safe space. This is the 90s.
Wow.
Yeah, so I've always done that as if children are going through something, let's help them recover straight away from what they're going through.
Yeah. And
get to a place where they can talk about it and they can own their story, but they can move forward from it, rather than it's held within the subconscious and causes all of these symptoms to be disconnected from the story. Let's have the story and the symptoms together, because then you're less powerless. You're more empowered. And recovery is quite natural then. I guess I'm not hugely English.
Yeah, go on.
Maybe that's the thing. Yeah. I'm just thinking, where do I learn this then? But I guess I was born in Burundi.
Amazing.
In a genocide.
Less amazing.
Yeah. So we had to kind of escape.
Oh, wow. So that's experienced trauma from a very young age.
Well, yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I guess that whole, there's a culture around, sort of, we went between Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda and Uganda because we had to keep running away. And there's much more of a culture of emotional expression. That's my experience of it.
Yeah,
I'm not putting it across an entire nation, but I'm saying from my experience, there was a much more sense of wailing, screaming, shouting, crying, and doing that in groups. It's quite normal to do that. And then dancing and drums and everything's kind of out. And so I find the English culture a little bit repressed. Is that polite? Just, we don't talk about this. I mean, I remember being a child and having people actually say, no, we don't talk about that. Oh, well, that makes me want to talk about it more.
Yeah.
Why are we not talking about it? Give me the reasons we're not talking about it. So all of this, no, that's private. Let's push that down. Let's pretend that didn't happen. Let's be in denial. Let's be in avoidance, is, I believe, making us very unwell. We're designed to need each other. We're not designed to live in isolation. We're designed to need each other and be able to process. And a lot of trauma is non-verbal because it's too overwhelming. It's too terrifying, and it can, unless the person you're talking to understands shame and they can reduce the shame in the conversation, it can actually cause people to feel increasing shame. So if I said to you something awful that happened to me and you went, oh goodness, I'm glad that didn't happen to me, I might feel shame.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Whereas you're trauma trained. So if I said something awful that happened to me, your reaction would be?
Empathetic and validating and
exactly.
all the things that you actually train on as well.
Yeah. And that makes all the difference.
Yeah.
Go on.
So I was just thinking, because you've talked a bit about TRC, you've set up therapy centres 14 years ago now, like to the week.
So. Yeah. So, yeah, May.
Amazing.
Yeah.
But then you train people in trauma, and you obviously write books. So why did you do that?
Yeah. Oh, that's a whole story, isn't it? You're right. Yeah, okay. This is entirely spontaneous, by the way. So, yeah, this is fun. I love a spontaneous chat. It's authentic.
Yeah.
And that's a big value of mine, is authenticity. Fake is a thing, isn't it? It doesn't make you feel emotionally safe.
Yeah.
Whereas when people are authentic, you feel emotionally safe. And a trauma-informed environment is emotionally safe.
Yeah.
So, therefore, we need to be authentic. Right. So I started the charity, called it the Trauma Recovery Centre. Thought that was normal, employed lots of creative therapists, art therapists, music therapists, play therapists, and some others, and thought that they'd all understand trauma recovery. Was very surprised. And actually in this book, I think near the end, I've actually got some quotes from social workers, paediatricians, ed psychs, and some others who were all saying they never learnt recovery in their qualifying courses as well. It's actually in the book. We should probably look at that in another podcast. And so they were beginning to work with clients. I don't like that word, but real humans. And as we were working with real humans, it became apparent that quite a lot of them didn't really know how to facilitate recovery.
Yeah, wow.
And they began. I was their clinical line manager, and I began to realise that they didn't really have any confidence about that. They were confident in non-directive therapy, in therapy whether it's child-led or young person-led, but not in really how to facilitate recovery. There seemed to be no strategy, I think. So that's where I was like, okay, I need to start training you. So I still had young children at the time. So it was a big deal for me to not go home and make food. Every Thursday, I remember it so clearly. I don't think my husband had cooked. I was like, no, you're going to cook every Thursday because I'm going to start training the team. So I did.
Yeah,
and every Thursday I started training. And then they used to say, can we invite our friends? And it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then one day, the trustees of TRC, of which I am the chair, but the others, which included a clin psych from Australia, they just went, you need to take ownership of this. This is your intellectual property. And I cried. And I went, no, it's not. Is it? And they was like, no, really, you really need, this is your training. You need to start a training organisation. And at the same time, actually, I was going through an interesting 5-year season where I was harassed and had a death threat. And that harassment man, the person that did that, had actually spent something like £40,000 on domain names in my name.
That's awful.
Well, what's funny is when the police said that, I said, what's a domain name? I didn't know what one was. Yeah. So the police sat me down literally the same week and said, you need to start a website called Betsy de Thierry. And I just went, what? They said, take your name back. You've lost your name. You need to own your name. So I started a training business because the TRC trustees told me to, the police told me to the same week.
Yeah, wow, what timing.
Yeah, Betsy de Thierry Limited, which felt quite narcissistic.
Which is your worst nightmare.
Yep. So it's now changed its name, although that's still the official company name. It's changed its name to Trauma Recovery Global because that's more in line with what we do.
Yeah. Because you're working in how many nations now?
Well, I think there's been over 32 nations that I have trained people, from.
And that's really exciting when it's focusing on this like concept of recovery and actually how can we see people recover?
Yeah.
If that's really not the focus in a lot of people's qualifying courses, that's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think if I can say the thing that I think is the most kind of stand out in your training is how you conceptualize trauma. Because you've done your definition, but the types of trauma. And I wondered if you could maybe speak into that a bit, because I just think that's really helpful for people to get their heads around different experiences that people go through. Yeah, no, that's true. And now I'm thinking, I think I start every book like that. And now I'm thinking, do we have to start every podcast like that? Yeah, maybe. It's the sequential kind of part of it, isn't it, that makes it make sense? Because otherwise, when we talk about trauma, there isn't that shared understanding of really what we're talking about. And so I have something called the Trauma Continuum, and the Trauma Continuum has, it's a line. So it's type 1, 2, and 3, and type 1 is single incident trauma.
And those single incidents are the one-off experiences, which can be utterly life-changing and horrific. Yeah. Absolutely terrifying events. They are terrifying and overwhelming events. Such as, sorry if this is difficult, but things like the death of somebody that we love, maybe a car crash or moving house or those kind of things. They're one-off awful experiences. The key thing about that is usually you can talk about them because there's not that much shame connected to them, compared to type 2 trauma, which is where something keeps happening. Or if it doesn't keep happening, it could keep happening again. So whereas a car crash, you think it could happen again. It could, but statistically, it might not now because you might be a little bit even more careful, or it just doesn't happen regularly. It just doesn't. Whereas things in type 2 trauma are more like abuse. They're more like domestic violence, domestic abuse, poverty, arguably, extreme poverty, things that are just, they're always there. You can't seem to get out of it. Whereas hopefully in type 1, there's the possibility that you can get out of it in some way. It impacts your life forever. It marks you potentially forever. But there's even the possibility of post-traumatic growth in type 1. Type 2 is a lot harder. And then there's type 3, which I call a terrifying life. And that's when we're working with people and we have to put in, a summary of the referral documents for that person. And we're like, well, there's so many things that have happened to them. They've been through all of it. Like, what haven't they been through? It's all of the different things, including the type 1 and the type 2s. And the key thing for me is that in type 1 trauma, you can talk about it. You still need safe people. You still need to find emotional safety with it, but you can talk. Type 2, you begin to not be able to talk about it. Often there's secrecy about that. Often there's loyalty. And there's also betrayal trauma within that. So it's a totally different impact level and different symptoms. And by type 3 trauma, usually the defense mechanisms and the coping mechanisms are so strong and so clever to keep the person alive that actually that's also completely different, very similar to type 2, but way more profound in its impact. So understanding that helps us understand what kind of things help us recover and what don't. And sadly, most of the sort of the formal official documentation around trauma in most nations is talking about it as if type 1 trauma is trauma. That's it. You can talk about it. Mm-hmm. It's time to talk. Let's talk. There are no words when it's type 2 and 3.
So this message, you've obviously wrestled with this forever. Mm. What do you think could change if society understood that? And currently, what is the problem with maybe society not understanding that? Mm.
Yeah, so I think if we understood that, it's not a hierarchical system. It's not well, I'm worse than you. I've had worse things happen to me. That's not at all what it's about. In no way are we minimalising a type 1 trauma experience. We're saying with a recovery lens on, the recovery route is completely different. So what you need for type 1 trauma is far more accessible, some safe people in your world, the ability to talk, some emotional safety and physical safety, and that can still take a while. And it might still take you 5 years to recover from a type 1 trauma while you're talking about it. So it's not even the length of time. It's more the how. How do you recover from that is very, very different. And I think the world is geared to that. Type 2 and 3 takes far more commitment to essentially unravel the subconscious, to feel safe enough to do that and do that in a safe enough way. The problem is there's not a huge amount of training on that, and there's not a huge amount of people that recognize that. And so our systems are geared to short-term 6 weeks intervention for children, young people or adults. And you should be lucky if you have that. But if you have that, that's actually going to be horrific for type 2 or 3. Because usually in type 2 or 3, there's attachment trauma as well, which means you need to heal the attachment trauma with a consistent, predictable person who's going to help you through this. So 6 weeks causes arguably more of a ruptured attachment, which just adds to your sense of nobody really cares. What's the point anyway? No one really wants to know me, so I'll just fake it.
Which I guess moves away from recovery in the wrong direction.
Totally. Yeah, it doesn't have to. if you understand this, then actually it's possible that you can do 6 weeks, and within that you can explain that and say, we're not here, we can't facilitate recovery, but we can give you some tools that could be really helpful for you in your day-to-day life while you wait for having maybe a year's therapy with somebody that's able to facilitate more stages of recovery. But when people don't know about type 2 and 3 trauma, they think that these 6 weeks with maybe the tools is it. We're done now. Am I better? And I find that devastating, actually.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, no, it is. And so I guess your mission is to advocate for kids at the other end of the trauma continuum. What is your dream for, like, maybe just this nation?
Wow.
What is your dream to see change that could make real change for them? Like, how do you see that going?
Oh my goodness, that could take a long time.
Sorry, that's a big question.
It's a big question to end with, because I think we've got to end, and I have so much to say about that. I would love to see trauma really understood from a recovery lens in every sector, in our education sector, in all the schools. And my goodness, teachers and teaching assistants and heads, they couldn't work harder at the moment with a system that's really difficult and challenging. I'd love to see it in our health system, where we understand emotional safety. And again, everyone's too busy, everyone's too stressed, everyone's trying their best. Nobody could try harder. But I still think we could have some training there that would change the cultures, that would enable people to heal faster. Because actually things like kindness, there's research that evidences when someone's kind to you as they give you medicine, if they're kind to you with a spelling test, you do better. Yeah. It's not even rocket science. Yeah. It's just been pushed away as well. We haven't got time for kindness. No, we really have, because it enables physical health to get, like, it increases chances of and the speed of physical health recovery. Oh, wow. And learning retention. If we think of the neurobiology of trauma, we know that children can learn faster and better and quicker and retain information if there's kindness. Just that simple thing, let alone the criminal justice system, where none of us can remember memories unless there's a kind and a trauma-informed and a compassionate environment. If there's punitive and authoritarian and scary environments, we all have a neurobiological reaction that means that we struggle with remembering facts. Yeah. So all of our systems can completely change when we understand that words are difficult in trauma, that we need kindness in trauma, we need cultures that are trauma-informed, and we need to know who we are within the system. There's a part for all of us to play, and it would be awful if everyone became a therapist. It would be awful. But we need therapists, but we also need mentors, and then we need people that understand trauma-informed practice. All of us. And when we all get to do that, I think we could significantly transform systems to be human-centered, to be compassionate, learning environments where humans are recognized for how complex we are. And in that recovery, if we have a recovery lens, rather than just surviving and coping and managing symptoms and living with like ceilings over our head of, no, because of what's happened to me, this is all I can manage. I get that. I 100% get that. But I fully believe that we can recover from anything that's happened to us. I do.
That is a very hopeful message, especially in the world today.
Yeah. Hence I wrote the book. Anyway, that's enough, I think, for our first ever podcast. We tried. Let us know how we did. We're learning as we go, unashamedly. We're wanting to be helpful. We've been asked to do this, and I hope it is helpful as we begin to explore how can you recover from trauma. Send us your questions, and we'll explore those. Bye.